Hey, this is Birch. So, talking a little bit about movies, comic movies, and wanted to at least throw some thoughts down around why has the Marvel Cinematic Universe worked and DC's universe has struggled. Now, again, this is I'm talking with box office, not really critical appeal, because everybody likes a little bit of everything, and there are people who swear by either fan base, either universe, and that's fine. You're going to like what you like. But I think it's a true enough statement to say that Marvel has faced a lot fewer headwinds in their efforts than DC has. And why is that? I mean, there's a lot of answers. There's not just one. But I think part of it comes down to kind of the fundamental DNA of the each universe and what both companies, both properties bring to the table. So, for one, Marvel has always had a slightly their phrase is the world outside your window, so a slightly more realistic take to it. It's hard to say realistic when you got like the Thunder God and Spider Man and people getting powers from radioactive serum and cosmic rays. I mean, it's a weird world where that is the realistic side of the world. But Marvel has always been slightly more connected to current events and I'd say current pop culture and storylines that are slightly more realistic. And a good example of that is the power set of Marvel's characters. They were careful not to overpower their characters. They'd have powers, they'd have weaknesses, they'd have struggles, and it was a little bit more balanced. And I think translates a little bit better to movies or to TV as a result. You can say I'm going to do a movie and here's a street level hero or here's somebody with some superpowers or here's this or that, and it's just a little bit easier to translate because you can tell a quicker story because you can hook off of current events or other films that have done certain things. If you look at a lot of Marvel movies, even the biggest Marvel fan would admit that several of their storylines and their techniques that they've used for their films have been not copied, but certainly there's been inspiration from other films. Iron Man as a film, as a superhero origin film, took a lot from spy movies that had been out and just various action films of how they're going to handle the science and so on. So there's a little bit more material to draw from. DC, on the other hand, has a little bit more. I don't know the best word if I want to describe timeless quality or their characters. They do have the problem that they have overpowered characters, and so they've had to come up with overpowered villains to kind of handle that. Batman has been the easiest one to translate based on the power set and the characters, but even there, Batman's villains are fantastical, a little bit more outlandish. And again, you can always throw up, well, you got the Joker with his, the crazy face and the schemes, but you have the Red Skull with the crazy face and the schemes. So it really is that much different. It's not much. It's very subtle, but there is enough of I think enough of weight or importance or a little bit tougher, I think, for DC films to immediately translate. If you have Green Lantern, you've got a lot of mythology and a ring that's going to make any kind of construct. And there's a lot of things going on there that are just going to make it a little bit harder to translate into a film than, say, Captain America, a guy with a shield who runs around, who's muscly and fights villains. It's an easier thing to both pitch and execute. It doesn't mean it's impossible. But I think that Marvel had a bit of an easier go of it in terms of just finding stories that could easily be digested and resonate with non-comic fans than DC, where even really iconic characters like Superman, who everybody recognizes, you still have the problem that you have this all-powerful guy who can as we see in the movies, turn back time, do anything, and yet his weakness is a green rock, and you got to find this green rock, and then there's Lex Luthor. You just got to be in balance there, so you have to be very clever with how you're going to tell that story. And I think that's, that it just makes it slightly harder. So DC, I think, Marvel came out and they started doing their thing and they had the backing of Disney, ultimately to really put some gas on the fire and get things moving. And DC, I think, had to put themselves in a catch up position but it's hard to play catch up when you have a franchise in Batman, and the Batman movies have done very, very well. So you may be listening to this going, "What are you talking about? The Dark Knight, made all kinds of money," and you're absolutely right. It did. That was its Batman was always going to be its easiest property to throw out there. But as soon as you start to throw in Superman and Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Flash and all these other characters, you kind of get into this exact problem where how do you tell a story where you've got Batman and Superman on the screen at the same time and not have it just be laughable of such a different power set? How do you explain that to an audience? And as we saw with Batman v Superman, it was there's people who like the film, people who hate the film, but I think most people could agree that aspects of putting those characters on the screen at the same time are clunky. And then you throw in, we've got to come up with some really big threats. So over here, we've got Darkseid, we've got Luthor, and we've got Apocalypse and Steppenwolf and Black Manta, and it's a tougher mix to throw on the table all at once and get something going. And then also, like I've mentioned before, a DC kind of approached this universe in a bit of a panic, like we've got to catch up. And I think whenever you're backed in a corner and have to catch up, your ability to make great moves and do smart things it hurts, it suffers. So that was the unfortunate position I think DC found itself in. But it was not easy for DC to get where it needed to go, and it took them a while to find their footing. They seem to now have it with Wonder Woman was a success and did pretty well, and Aquaman was a success and did very well, and Shazam's coming out and it's going to do well. By the time you listen to this and it goes up, it will be out in the theaters already. But the early buzz and kind of they're hitting the sweet spot. Let's take a superhero movie and mash it up with big, and there you go. The challenge DC is going to have still is bringing all these characters together in one place and having a story that can delicately balance all this stuff. And frankly, I mean, nobody said it out loud, but you may see DC just not. Maybe you have this big kind of very loosely shared universe where you refer to some things, but almost like Netflix did with the Marvel characters, they just let everybody breathe and do their own thing. And you don't try and stir them all up together, because as soon as you do, the juggling becomes very, very difficult. I think it's been difficult with Marvel for the Avengers. They've made lots of money, and Infinity War and Endgame are just well orchestrated in how they're all coming out, but it's still challenging. And I think that, in the decade to come, Marvel is going to, face some struggles with putting all these characters on the screen at once and telling a story that doesn't, fall over on itself. And DC with Justice League did. It didn't land. And so I think you may see, this would be DC doing the smart thing and just not. Let's make Aquaman 2 and let's figure out another Shazam, and let's, what is the next, do we want to do something with Flash? What would that look like? Can we make Green Lantern a thing? I think you'll see DC just kind of go all in building up these individual characters, and that's probably the healthiest thing they can do with their franchise, and maybe over time healthier than having a big combined, let's get everybody together on one moment on the screen kind of movie. Certainly a lot less risky, but that's kind of some of the differences. I think, people who are not big comic fans look at comic movies and say, comic movie is a comic movie. It's all the same. Just what works for one will work for the other. And I think there's enough proof now that, there is very core fundamental differences between Marvel and DC. And so their strategies should be different. They shouldn't try and replicate each other. And I think it seems like they've learned a little bit of that lesson. And, we'll see Endgame's going to come out and make just gobs of money. And I'm sure somebody at DC in the upper management chain is going to start yelling, why aren't we making that money? And then who knows, maybe they're going to go right back into trying to figure out Justice League 2. And, but I wouldn't. I think, you can make very solid, very financially profitable films by just, for lack of a better word, stay in your lane, do your thing, do it well. If you learn nothing else from the Dark Knight trilogy, just do it, do that. Like or dislike the film. You have some creators come in, tell a story, maybe tell 3 or 4 movies worth of story, and then do something else with another creator, and don't try and tie it all together so that you weaken your own brand. But what do you think? You think I'm crazy? Are there fundamental differences between Marvel and DC? where the movies are concerned, what do you want to see as a comic fan? What do you want to have come out, and how do you want these properties to live on? Leave me some comments. Subscribe, notify, follow me on Twitter, whatever you want to do. And thanks for listening.